there are interesting things happening inside of the home builder industry that I think are worth talking about today, because they are, I think they're evidence of some enterprise and some creative thinking and, incentives in markets sometimes work and sometimes don't. Certainly home builders would like to have more people buying new homes. And one way to do that is to offer terms that they wouldn't otherwise be able to secure on their own. That there is a kind of a movement inside of home building right now to offer first year mortgage rates that are next to nothing. Well, 2%, 1% incentivized first year mortgage rates that would adjust after the first year, but give the buyer an opportunity to get in, saving against the broader market, 5% or more, at this point. Where is this idea coming from? And how is it working so far?
I mean, it's great for home builders. They've been able to undercut, resale inventory for the most part, past couple of years. The way they do it is, incentives, right? They pay for the incentives.
Right.
Somebody pays for the incentive.
So is it built into is this something that would be built into the cost of a home and just a consideration?
It's a discount. And ultimately, the only way they're able to do that is if they're able to cut costs themselves, right? If cost of home builders are rising, then they have to pass on those higher costs into the final price, right? Or you see their profit margins shrink. And so what do builders do? Well, they are leaning into smaller projects. Homes have gotten smaller. They're leaning into projects on smaller lots. You'll notice that more homes are being built on smaller lots now. They're fitting more homes on smaller lots. They're doing that because that's a way, especially the lot size. That's a way to cut costs.
Let me just give you an anecdote on that. So years ago when I worked at the Denver Post, we lived in suburban Arvada in Jefferson County, just outside of metropolitan Denver. And I had an opportunity to be back in Denver this past week, and drove through like my kind of the area where I used to live. And at the time, rental apartments were not, there were some. Certainly there were townhomes and, smaller homes available. But the development in particular in the last 10 years, down and around what they would call Old Town, Arvada, is all high density housing. And they're very attractive homes. This sort of the newer box style townhomes, with the big windows and where you are there.
Lots of light,
right.
Lots of sunlight.
But the density is something that we didn't see, which, this is now going on 25 years ago. So the way that builders are building more narrow, taller, and certainly the finishes, on new homes are sort of taking the place of size. It's a much nicer finishes, much nicer environments,
beautiful countertops,
but smaller.
That's right. The townhomes and condos, right? And it really started. It's been going on for a while, but it really intensified when mortgage rates more than doubled in 2022, right? That's when it intensified. Buyers saw their purchasing power half overnight, almost, and builders stepped in. They stepped in to continue to fill the gap. People want to own their homes, right? There's a lot of survey data that shows that most people who are renters today started out, more than half of renters today started out their search looking to buy, right? That's some Zillow data that a friend of mine, my connections at Zillow, gave me access to. Just kidding. I have access to the data. I can see it. So survey data shows that Zillow survey data shows that more than half of people, renters today, started out looking to buy. So there's this pent up demand for housing, for home ownership out there. That the builders are basically saying, hey, look, we understand things are pricey right now. So we're going to do everything we can to help fill that void. And that's how markets work, right? Builders move where demand is, right? When we got the demand shock during the pandemic, supply increased to a record high, 50-year high record new construction, new homes being started, right? And so wherever demand is where supply goes. That's the economics. Now here's the problem. There are places that prevent that adjustment. There are places where bad policies, right? Like, we got a minimum lot size requirement, right? So these land use rules sometimes cause this friction, right? That prevents supply from quickly adjusting to the changes in demand, right? And those are the places where you haven't seen a lot of new construction during the pandemic, right? And so
San Francisco is typically held up as the poster child for that in terms of ordinances and, requirements that just they don't jibe with the reality of the need for housing in that specific market.
Yeah.
But it certainly happens in other places too.
It happens in a lot of places. There's good news though there, right? I don't want to be all bad news here. There's good news. The good news is because of the affordability challenges that we've seen recently, public support for building in their own backyard has increased. And governments are now paying attention. You hear about it everywhere from the White House to localities. Like everyone is now talking about housing affordability and everyone is now talking about these land use regulations, and starting to think, okay, maybe we need to do something about it because when the public support shifts, the public shifts, politicians tend to pay attention, right?
How long do you think these incentives, I mean, we're talking specifically around these first year mortgage opportunities, these 1% and 2%. I mean, how long do you think they last? They're kind of coming in the backdrop of President Trump last week, talking about the normalization of 50-year mortgages, which is, a very different consideration. How long do you think these super low first year interest rate incentives from builders last?
I think they last as long as interest rates remain elevated, which I think interest rates are likely to persist, right? It becomes the new norm. It's either I cut the price.
Yes.
Or I provide the incentive.
In spite of the Federal Reserve reducing, the borrowing rate.
Well, I mean, forget about the Federal Reserve, the economy. If the economy is strong, rates will remain elevated. If the economy tanks, rates will dip. The economy is slowing and we've seen a rate adjustment, but we're not in a recession. We know that you've lived through many recessions and you know that in every major recession, rates start to drop drastically, right? Whether we're going to see 3% mortgage rates again, it's probably not going to happen, but rates will drop. They'll drop. If we go into a recession, rates could drop in the 5% range, maybe the high 4% range, right? I think, if you go back to 2019, we weren't even in a recession, but rates were pretty low. Right? And so that's what's going to happen. I think the incentives are here to stay because most builders don't like having to cut the price. They'd rather keep the price where it's at, right? And you see some price drops, but they're very small, right? And instead, they'll rather give the incentives away. And they're going to do that until we get another demand shock, another big boost, improvement in affordability, big increase in population growth, right? To help justify these current price levels, right? And so until we see that, the incentives are here to stay. Are we going to see that anytime soon? Well, look, fertility rates are low and falling. Immigration is falling. I think the incentives are here to stay, right? And that's, I think it's probably the best way to
yeah, I think through the current view of the crystal ball that makes sense, just for the benefit of people who are trying to track the mortgage market but aren't really paying attention to it too closely. The Freddie Mac has the 30-year fixed rate now at 6.22%, the 15-year at 5.5%.
Yeah, the coolest thing though about this is, I mean, we called it. Since 2022. I have been on stages around the country telling people that rates were not going to go back down below 6%. And they haven't, right? And they haven't. And that's why you want to listen to Everyday Economics, because what we're doing here is trying to explain to people what is the mechanism, what is under the surface, right? Because, you had lots of people. I don't want to call out people. We had lots of prominent economists in the housing sector talking about rates falling below 6%. Some people even called rates falling below 5%, and I was like, no, guys, I had executives at mortgage companies talking about rates falling below 5% again back in 2022. Right. And I remember saying, no, this is not going to happen, but you have to understand why this is not going to happen. And we kind of lay it out for people right here on the Everyday Economics podcast.
Well, I appreciate your thoughts as always. And that's a great way for us to bring this to a close. And so I would just say thank you for what you do. And, for Orphe Divounguy, this has been Chris Krug. Subscribe to Everyday Economics wherever you get your podcasts, and make sure you listen to Dr. O and me each week on the Center Square Radio Hour.